there are a lot of different ways to go with this. The 90s were particularly interesting. On September 18th, 1990, 95 years to the day that Booker T. Washington gave the speech that is deemed as the Atlanta Compromise, Atlanta was awarded the Olympic Games. And there's an interesting conversation that I had with Ambassador Young, but also I did not have the opportunity to interview Maynard Jackson, but I have combed every aspect of primary sources that I can find on him and interact quite a bit with his family. And so Maynard Jackson tells a story on how when they went to Tokyo to present the Olympic bid, they used a style that is seen in the black church. Now, how many of y'all go to the black church? Y'all know that there's a style that is called whooping. You know, the call and response, you know, somebody got to cry and fall out. Well, what it was is the Atlanta contingency presented Dr. King's dream as seen in Atlanta. So they presented this international conversation around human rights. And so I think Joe Frank Harris spoke, and then Billy Payne spoke. Is that right?
I was going to say the governor.
The governor, Joe Frank Harris, spoke, and then Billy Payne spoke, and then Maynard spoke. And Maynard was a gifted orator. And his grandfather used to teach him, if you really want to get down, you got to sit down in the middle of a storm and really, really preach. And then they brought in Ambassador Young, who's also a minister, to bring the whoop, and they wrote a song, and everybody cried and prayed, and Atlanta wins the bid. It's interesting that you
took up an offering.
Yeah. I mean, like it was a straight up altar call. It was you know, you could come by letter, all that kind of stuff that we see in the black church. It was one of those things. But what happens in this is the Olympics and the way in which the city would be franchised for world consumption would play out in black city government. And so you may mention Michael Lomax, who does create Fulton County. He decides that he's going to run for the mayor in 1989. And I can't quite figure it out as a scholar whether or not it was a setup or whether or not he just jumped out there and ran. Well, right before the election, he pulls out, because the Olympic Committee is basically like, we already know Maynard Jackson, so he has to run for a third term. Like, it was so much money involved. And then the conversation around Freaknik. So Freaknik actually starts in the 80s. It was a result of the Atlanta University Center's like Philly DC Club, and they would have a dance contest, you know, Chic La Freak, Freak Out, you know, and they would do all kinds of stuff, and they would do this stuff. And it morphed into something else. And so in the 90s, as the city was franchising, as the city was being glossed over, they spent too much money to allow black youth to come here and trick off. And I was it's a crazy thing. Somehow or another, I was able to go to the 94, 95, and 96 Freakniks. But I was like 17 at one of them. And my folks weren't playing that, but I was in Atlanta and I was at Freaknik. So I know how it happened, but it is what it is. But I remember in 96, them shutting down the interstates and not letting us in. I also remember being in the 9th grade in 1992 when the Rodney King riots took place here, and the young people from the Atlanta University Center and from, you know, the areas close to the AUC marched downtown and were ready to act up, and they were tear gassed. And they saw that as Maynard Jackson's way of growing fat on our parents' generation, but turning his back on the youth. And so what comes out of that is a critique of the city on a national and international stage, and the best way of doing it is looking at organized noise, the Dungeon Family's Outkast and Goody Mob, and how they made instances like crooked-ass Jackson got the whole country thinking that my city's the big lick for 96. They lay it out. They make expletives of Eldrin Bell. They talk about the flying of the Confederate battle flag. You see this all-out counter-narrative, and all of this was really kind of positioned because of Atlanta's notoriety as the city. There's and just me closing out this, and you can ask some questions and we can respond about this. There's a hot Atlanta trope that is a combination of black and white coalitions that come together to franchise the city. There's the black Mecca trope, and then there's what I call the all black everything trope, a group of black folk that exist outside of this world, outside of interaction with whites and outside of the Western gaze. And so lastly, and I meant to say this in the 60s, there was a series of newspaper articles that printed in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution entitled The Two Cities of Atlanta, a painstaking conversation around race. And it lays out everything that sets this up. So